Welcome everyone. Happy Monday after the time change. I hope everyone is feeling wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. I'm kidding. So excited to be with you here this morning as folks are joining. Please introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your pronouns, your organization, and the area or the county or the state where you work or where you serve. Good morning, everyone. We are recording this. For those of you that are unable to join us, we're going to share the recording of the presentation as well as the slides. So this is the fourth meeting of the New Jersey Paid Leave Outreach Collaborative. And we are going to be discussing supporting survivors of domestic violence and the importance of economic security and how paid leave can play a role in that. Thanks, everyone. Yes, please continue to introduce yourselves here. We're going to be doing this meeting in the Zoom and meeting format, so please just make sure that you're muted. And we're going to take questions in a little bit after the presentation on paid leave, but feel free to put your question in the chat as you think of it, and we'll go through that when we have time. Yes, please introduce yourselves, your name, your pronouns, organization, and the county or area where you work in the chat. Welcome, everyone. So happy to have you. So while folks are doing that, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Yara Lomancole. I work at New Jersey Citizen Action, and I help convene the New Jersey Time to Care Coalition. So the Time to Care Coalition is made up of a diverse range of organizations, all working to promote and advocate to pass programs and laws that help workers afford to take time from work to care for their own health as well as their loved ones' health. As I mentioned before, this is a meeting of the New Jersey Paid Leave Outreach Collaborative, which is an offshoot of the coalition, but is independent in the sense that it's an initiative focused on implementation and education of our paid leave programs and laws. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second, but I just want to first let my colleagues Fatmata and Mumtahina introduce themselves. Fatmata, you want to start?
Hi, my name is Fatmata, and I am the paid leave organizer for New Jersey Citizen Action. Yes, and I'll pass it over to Mumtahina.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mumtahina Afrin. I am the digital organizer for New Jersey Citizen Action, and I will be on the back end of the meeting today. So if anything goes wrong technically, it's all my fault. So there you go. Not Yara's, not at all Yara's fault.
Thanks. That's always reassuring. If you'd like, go to the next slide and do the introduction of some of the services that New Jersey Citizen Action provides. Thank you, Mumtahina.
All right, so we provide free services in terms of housing, rental, and foreclosure, counseling, eviction protection, financial coaching. We assist with healthcare enrollment, tax preparation. So it's tax season. Definitely, if you know someone or you yourself need any assistance with tax preparation, we do it for free. We can report housing discrimination. We have an oil group that helps with utility assistance, and then a free consumer webinar. I'll link this slide in the chat so you guys have it at your disposal, and you can really reach out and try to get any sort of assistance. Yeah.
Thank you, Mumtahina. Great. So you can go to the next slide, and what we're actually going to do is launch a quick poll to see what perspective you bring today. And I know that everyone is introducing themselves in the chat. That's great. We have folks that are domestic violence advocates, HR professionals, other advocates. So we're going to just kind of get a sense of who is joining us today. If you can go ahead and do that poll. And while you're doing that, if you can, go to the next slide. Just check the option that fits the most, that is most appropriate for you. And there is the option of other, if none of them really work for you. So just very quickly, while you're answering that poll, wanted to share with you the agenda for today. So we're going to introduce our colleagues at the Coalition to End Domestic Violence here shortly. They're going to provide us with really the grounding and context facing domestic violence and economic security. And then we're going to do an overview of paid family leave and domestic violence and how to access it. And then a little bit more in terms of know your rights, what you can do in terms of your perspective if you work with domestic violence survivors or you're in HR, whatever perspective you bring, some specific resources and support and tips for what you can do to support domestic violence survivors. We're going to have very short discussion groups. Really hope you can stay for the full duration so we can get your perspective in those groups. Really, we find that those are also really helpful for people to have a nice conversation with what they're learning. And then as we wrap up, we're going to just talk about barriers facing survivors and access to paid leave. All right, so I'm going to end the poll. You can go to the next slide as I do that. Oh, yeah. So I'm going to share that so you can all see. We have majority of folks that are on the call today are specifically working with domestic violence survivors as domestic violence advocates, so welcome. And we have some others as well in the audience, maybe more generally working with service in providing direct services, social workers, other types of advocates, and some HR professionals. And we welcome those of you who are identifying as domestic violence survivors as well. So thank you for doing that. And I'm going to actually launch poll number 2. Yes, and if you haven't introduced yourself yet, please go ahead and do so in the chat. And now, our next poll is to get a sense of how familiar you are with New Jersey paid family leave. While you're answering that, and again, just answer it to your best ability. There may not be a perfect fit for you, but go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm gonna just briefly share with you more about the Paid Leave Outreach Collaborative. This is our 4th meeting. We've met in 2021 3 times, and so we're really happy to have this be our first meeting in 2022. The collaborative was really founded to look at the idea that people need to better understand and be aware of paid leave options in New Jersey. And so the collaborative is really, the goal is to increase workers and employers' awareness and understanding of paid leave in New Jersey so that all workers can access paid time off when they need it the most. So really, despite the fact that we're one of just a handful of states with a paid leave program, there are still many workers, many advocates who are unaware of paid leave benefits, or if they're aware, they may be unfamiliar with certain aspects, such as the one we're going to be discussing today about domestic violence. So I am going to, again, invite you to sign up to be part of the collaborative. We have a form we can share with you and all the efforts that we're undertaking this year in terms of increasing awareness, and all are welcome. So let's see, as everyone has done this poll, I think, what the results are. All right, thank you for doing that. Okay, so as I said, there's a lot of confusion around paid family leave. So you may be familiar, but you're confused, or you're just a little bit familiar. And some of you have actually used paid family leave as well. But I see that there is some knowledge here, while some of you haven't been exposed to paid family leave. So we're happy to do a very brief training here in just a minute on that. So thank you, everyone. You can go to the next slide. So you can actually stop sharing, Monsina. Thank you. What we're gonna do actually is we're gonna invite our amazing partners at the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence. As I said before, they're gonna help us really get grounded in the issue of domestic violence and economic security. So with that, I'm happy to welcome Nicole Morella, who is the Director of Policy and Education at CEDV. Welcome, Nicole.
Morning, Yarrow. Thank you so much. I'm actually going to start sharing my screen. I'll start us off with a little video, and then I'll do a little bit more about who the coalition is, our connection with the Time to Care Collaborative, and introduce more of our team members.
Every week, a woman is killed by a partner or a family member.
800,000 women will experience violence at home this year.
We support women to survive
We help them access the help and support they need.
and find their way to safety.
We see how hard it is for women to leave a violent relationship.
And we know how long it can take for women and children to recover.
We see the sacrifices and challenges of surviving family violence.
The time that it takes to meet with police, lawyers, real estate agents and doctors.
With counsellors, schools and childcare centres.
All within business hours.
To escape a violent relationship, you have to take time off from work.
Without paid leave, women simply don't have time or resources to find a new safe place to live.
We see how hard this is.
And we understand how much it costs.
Women have told us what they need and we have heard them.
To leave, you need leave.
At a minimum, 10 days paid leave.
1 year ago, the Turnbull government made a commitment to do something about family violence in Australia.
Family violence is a complex issue, and at times it can be overwhelming to know how to respond.
But we can do something.
We can change the national employment standards to include 10 days paid leave for all workers.
It's a small change that will make a huge difference.
Paid leave will help save lives.
We can't wait.
And we won't wait.
So as the video, I think, highlights, and as many of us in this room know, the impact of domestic violence on survivors isn't just physical, it isn't just emotional, but we know that there's an incredible financial cost that survivors of domestic violence experience, incur, and have to manage when they are trying to take steps to keep themselves safe, to plan for their safety, and potentially to leave that relationship. And we know there's a tremendous economic cost to stay out of an abusive relationship and to try to manage thriving with them and their families. We're really grateful to be part of the Time to Care Coalition Collaborative and the Paid Leave Partnership. The Coalition to End Domestic Violence understands economic abuse as part of a survivor's experience with domestic violence. And as such, that economic security must be part of a survivor's safety plan. And so our goal today really is to talk a little bit about that, the intersection of domestic violence with economic security, and particularly how it might look for a survivor in the workplace and who may be employed and have access to employment resources, but may not be in a place yet where they're able to connect with domestic violence supporter resources or knowledgeable about the benefits and the rights that they have as an employee in New Jersey. As the video highlighted, this is certainly a conversation that's happening across the world, and it's certainly advocacy that we're doing here on the federal level in the United States, but we'll be talking today really primarily about New Jersey law and how we've really moved the ball here in New Jersey to recognize domestic violence within the workplace and some of the steps that have been taken and that are continuing to be taken to address those issues. The New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence is a membership organization of 30 domestic violence programs and culturally specific organizations across the state, providing a range of domestic violence supportive services to the victims and survivors who may be experiencing domestic violence, to the children who may be experiencing domestic violence at home, as well as to the individual who may be causing harm. And so while many of us may think of the emergency safe house or the shelter or the helpline as our primary resources, those are really just a couple of the many, many resources and services that our domestic violence programs provide across the state. And at the bottom of this page, you'll find the link to our website where you can find all of those programs listed. And I know many of those programs are represented in this meeting. And I hope that for those of you that may be outside of the domestic violence world, that this is an introduction for all of you to become connected to your local programs, to learn about the services that they can provide, and to form collaboration so that together you can really work towards creating safe workplaces, as well as workplaces that are trauma-informed and knowledgeable about how you can support employees who may be impacted by domestic violence. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, about the role that each can play and the opportunities that we have to collaborate together. But I'm actually going to introduce one of our team members at the Coalition to End Domestic Violence, Beatrice Patino-Sherrard, Beatrice, who is our Economic Justice Coordinator, and will walk us through a little bit of what survivors experience when they're experiencing domestic violence and it intersects with economic abuse and control.
Thank you, Nicole, and good morning, everyone. Like Nicole said, my name is Beatrice Patino-Sherrard. I am the Economic Justice Coordinator for the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence. My pronouns are she and ella. And you can change to the next slide. Thank you, Nicole. And if you have worked with victims or survivors of domestic violence, you probably have seen this wheel in the past. Usually when I was also an advocate, I used to use this wheel to really explain what domestic violence was to a survivor and to others who were new to domestic violence. In this particular case, I wanted to share the economic power and control wheel. This really focuses on what economic abuse is. And I kind of, if you're not sure, I wanted to give you information about what economic or financial abuse is. And this involves in maintaining control over financial resources, withholding access to money, or attempting to prevent a survivor from working and sometimes even from attending school in an effort to create financial dependence as a means of control. Victims and survivors are often forced to choose between either staying in an abusive relationship or being poor or even homeless. Economic abuse is a very common reason victims stay in abusive relationships. Economic abuse can take many forms, and the different forms you can see in this wheel. And I hope it's clear. I know it's a lot of different readings, so I'm not going to read all of it. I'll definitely share this with everyone who would like it. But some of the forms that economic abuse looks like, I'm sorry. Thank you. It can look like using coercion and threats. And this looks like usually threatening the survivor to access any kind of needs that she or he may have to go to work. For example, not being able to use a telephone or a car to get to work. Sometimes even threatening to throw him or her out of the house. And things like that. Also using intimidation, so preventing the survivor from getting or keeping a job. This is something we see with abusive relationships, making the survivor ask for money or even giving the survivor an allowance. If the survivor works, taking all the money from the survivor and sometimes not letting the survivor know about any money that they have together or access to any of the family income. Some of the other things that we have seen is using the children, and right now it's tax season, and we have seen a lot of harm doers take a lot of the child benefits and supports, like the child tax credit, instead of for the survivor having it. The person who's causing harm might keep this money for themselves and refusing to even pay for things as diapers and milk for the children. And other things, and I'm not gonna go through all of them because I know we don't have a lot of time, but I kind of wanted to go to the ones that we see more of them. And probably if you work with domestic violence survivors, you see a lot of isolation. So if a survivor is going to work, they're gonna try to keep the survivor away from having friends at work and training the survivor not to talk about their relationship at home. Using emotional abuse as well, and using intimidation, like I said before, and male privilege. And you can go for the next slide. 99% of domestic violence survivors experience some kind of economic abuse as part of their domestic violence, which is practically all of the survivors are dealing with this. And it might look different for every different survivor, like I was showing you beforehand. Some of the numbers that I found in research, between 20 to 60% of domestic survivors lose their jobs as a direct result of their abuse. Why this happens, if a survivor has a bruise or they don't look okay to go to work, they usually won't go to the office because they're gonna be ashamed, they're gonna feel guilty, they don't want people to see them like that, so they will call out and not go to work, and sometimes also lose their job because of it. Sometimes when the survivor is working, constant calls or constant texts from the abuser will create an issue for the abuser, for the survivor, I'm sorry, to stay at work, because they're gonna keep having to respond to the phone calls, respond to the text, because if not, something might happen when they get home. We've also seen the person who causes harm go into the person's job and create scenes that makes the survivor lose their job as well. And this makes it so difficult for them to keep their job. So why is it so important for survivors to take time off from work when they're leaving that abusive relationship? I have a few information here for you. And some of the things is obviously filing a restraining order if that's safe for the survivor. That's something they need to do. Going to court takes a lot of time, and the time frames are usually during work hours. Other core matters like child support, child custody, things of that matter also take a lot of time. If the survivor is ready for counseling and going to one of the domestic violence programs, and usually they'll get one a week counseling services. They also need time and assistance for that. Also assistance for safety planning. That's some of the things that advocates of domestic violence will work with survivors and just tell them and help them do some safety planning, either around work and at home. Also seeking medical attention. If something physical happened to them, they do need to get attention from either the emergency room or the doctor. And another thing, seeking housing and shelter. And as you probably know, looking for housing in New Jersey, it's very complicated. There's not a lot of housing, and either safe housing and even just housing at all. And for someone who is not used to paying by themselves, it could be difficult to find housing that they can afford. Also opening bank accounts. Sometimes we don't think of that, but some survivors leave with nothing in their hands, no money, not anything, and they really need to find out or start opening a bank account to start saving for themselves for their future, and also fleeing abusive situations. So they also need time for those moments. And when a survivor is able to keep their job, they will more likely not return to the person who is causing harm. So this is something that is key. If a survivor is able to keep working to maintain that income coming to him or her, this is going to really not for them to say, you know what, I don't have to go back to that person who's causing harm to me, because they're gonna feel financially stable to be able to afford to stay away from that person. It's also good, and I didn't write it here, but it's also good for the employer to be able to offer this to a survivor because of retention. And if you're an employer, you probably can attest to this, that it's so difficult if you can't keep your employees, because then, you know, you're training them and how long it takes to train them, how much money it takes to train them. And then if you're able to keep and retain your employees, at the end of the day, employers will also be gaining from this. You can go to the next slide, Nicole. I also added some resources here. These are mainly for survivors of domestic violence and for people who might need them, not only for survivors, but I wanted to add this just so employers and others are able to know what they can even offer and what there's out there for survivors who might need this. So I added tax assistance, because right now, Obviously, it's tax season. VITA places are everywhere in New Jersey. So those links will take you exactly to those places. Also, the link to utility assistance, food assistance, credit building. As we know, a lot of survivors also leave those abusive relationships without any credit or really bad credit because the person causing harm took their Social Security and did a lot of damage to their credit. So this is something for them to build credit. I also added the Emergency Rescue Mortgage Assistance Program, and there's also technology assistance. This website is great for anyone who might need a cell phone or a computer and they don't have it. That's a great way to get one either for really low price or even for free. And this is all housing resources, so you can go through it as well and definitely share it with others who might need it. And that's all I have, Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to also just highlight some of the policies that have developed. And it's really been over the last, less than 10 years that we've really started to see this kind of this evolution and development of policies related to the workplace. Some of you may be familiar with the SAFE Act, so the Security and Financial Empowerment Act. And we'll talk a little bit about that as it overlaps and relates with the current family leave insurance policy. But this was the first piece of legislation that passed in our state that really recognized, as we've started to talk about and as Beatriz has outlined, the need for survivors to be able to take time off from work to address the number of things that may come up as a result of experiencing domestic violence and the need to navigate the different services and the systems to address their needs and to make sure that they're able to stay safe. And again, having that fear of losing my job or having to choose between my job and possibly keeping, a roof over my head and my kids safe at home, right? That having to make those choices sometimes will cause survivors to have to either stay in that abusive relationship or to go back if they know that I'm not going to have an income or I'm not going to have a way to support myself and my families. One of the challenges with this law and one of the benefits where it overlaps with the family leave insurance is that the SAFE Act was passed as unpaid leave. So while it does provide survivors that time off, it does allow for job protection. Oftentimes if the survivor didn't have the vacation time or the other time to be able to take concurrently, it would largely be unpaid time off. And so that certainly could create a barrier for survivors who need that income and who need that financial security, both as they're planning to potentially leave, but certainly after they've left that abusive relationship. Also in 2017, while this isn't specific to leave policies, I think it really is important to acknowledge, again, how not only do we want to make workplaces accessible in terms of survivors accessing resources and benefits, but we want to ensure that the workplace itself is a safe place, that survivors, or really I should say any employee, feel safe coming forward who may be having experiences with domestic violence, sexual violence, stalking, who they themselves might be the person who's causing harm in their relationship and want to talk to an HR officer about services that might be available for them in the community. And so I linked to this policy. It is specific for public employers. So this is state employees, municipal, county level employees, anybody who's in public employment. This HR policy is something that their workplace how they would respond to it within the workplace. The Earned Sick Leave Act. So this is really our first step into ensuring that survivors have access to paid leave. So this requires employers to offer their employees up to 40 hours of earned sick time in a year. And one of the benefits of this law was that it was passed to include that employees can use this time to address domestic and sexual violence. And similarly, in 2020, with the expansion of the New Jersey paid family leave insurance, provisions of this law also expanded to include domestic violence and sexual violence. So not only for an individual who may be impacted by it themselves and needing that time off, but both for the Earned Sick Leave Act and New Jersey Family Leave Insurance, those are policies that allow employees to take time off to care for somebody who's a family member or close proximity to them as a family member, to support them in navigating those number of services that we've talked about. So I'm going to stop sharing there, and I'm going to pass it back over to Yarrow, who I know will take us into a little bit more of a deep dive into paid leave.
Thanks, Nicole. Yes, Mom Tina, if you can start sharing the slides again from where we left off. But yeah, that was really valuable, I think, in terms of helping us understand the disproportionate economic insecurity, faced by survivors or those coping and trying to leave violence. So thank you for that. So we're going to dig a little more in terms of this lesser known aspect, since in part it is new. But before we go into the specifics of the domestic violence aspect of paid family leave in New Jersey, we are going to just do an overview, because we do think that the information will be helpful for you in all the different ways in which paid family leave can be utilized. So we're going to incorporate into this presentation just additional information and resources in terms of taking it for reasons related to domestic violence. But let's go ahead and start with the kind of big picture of where we're at in terms of paid family leave. If you can go to the next slide, Montina. So the big picture is, of course, that the US is pretty much the only country in the world without a national paid family leave program. There are a few other countries that we share this unfortunate title with, but there are no industrialized or developed countries that lack a national paid family leave program. So we really are at the very bottom. And this is something that people are starting to become more and more aware of. Go to the next slide. But the big but is, of course, that New Jersey does have a state paid family leave program, and it's actually been in effect since 2009, and it was expanded, as Nicole mentioned, in 2019, 2020 is when a lot of the pieces really took effect of that expansion. And the program, we actually want to just make it clear that it's called New Jersey Family Leave Insurance, or FLI, because there's a lot of abbreviations and they can get really confusing, right? You can go to the next slide. So just very briefly, before we get into sort of the nitty gritty about family leave insurance, just wanted to make sure that everyone has this kind of context around how valuable paid family leave really is. There's so much research and evidence. And of course, if you've ever taken it, or someone who's been able to actually afford to take the time off to care for their own health or their loved one's health, you understand this inherently, right? That it really is important for the health and well-being of children, of mothers, of the overall family, also the economic well-being. And in terms of addressing issues around health equity and the disproportionate impact of the lack of paid leave that we see amongst people of color, and also the health equity gaps that we see, just being able to afford to take the time off really helps address some of those inequities in health, as well as the workplace and in earnings. And you can go to the next slide. And we don't want to forget that it is also valuable and beneficial for employers. We often, we overlook this aspect, but it's important to remember from sort of the HR business perspective, it actually does have business benefits in terms of helping reduce turnover. Your workers are generally, more committed, more productive, higher morale, and more satisfied with their jobs when they're able to take leave when they really need it. And it does increase the employee's overall health, and that affects, of course, your bottom line in terms of healthcare costs. So those are just some side notes that we wanted to mention. And so what can you use family leave insurance for, or FLI? So when you need to take leave for bonding with a new child, caring for a loved one, and again, coping with domestic or sexual violence. You can go to the next slide. So most of the folks that are using FLI are actually using it for bonding. This is the aspect of the program that people are most familiar with. And so this is available for both parents in the first year after the baby is born, or after the placement or adoption of a child. So it's for all those different aspects of bonding with a new child, again, for both parents. as long as before the baby is 1. That's the timeline of when you can opt to take that. And then the other use that people are also kind of less familiar with is the aspect of caring for a loved one. So you can use family leave insurance to care for anyone who you consider to be like family. So that was part of the expansion that we saw take effect in 2020, where it's the definition of family that you bring to the person that you're caring for, as long as you consider them to be like family. So we use the word a loved one, right? And any reason that they are under the care of a healthcare provider, this could be a physical or mental health, because the healthcare provider does have to certify that individual's health condition so that you can take that time to care for them. Next slide. Okay, and so here we are with the aspect of domestic or sexual violence. So it's not only for the individuals themselves, the victims or survivors, but those who are caring for them. They can take the FLI program for any reason really related to dealing with issues of domestic or sexual violence. So as I think Nicole mentioned, and Beatrice, some of those reasons that you really can't take time after work hours or on weekends. You really have to take the time during working hours. And so there's so many different things, and these are just some examples: therapy, victim advocacy, legal services, recovering at home, seeking safe shelter, and I'm sure there's many more examples that you all could think of. You can go to the next slide. So here are some of the details in terms of accessing FLI for domestic violence. So you would be applying with what's called an FL1, the Family Leave Insurance application, and you're going to select caregiving as the need for leave. So that's either for you caring for your loved one or for you caring for yourself as a victim or survivor. There is a portion in the application, it's called a Part C when you get to the application, and we'll show you an example of what that looks like. And this is if you have a reason that you're unable to work for medical, that can be physical or mental, where you're under the care of a medical care provider, you would use that part to have the medical care provider certify your condition. But if you are not using it for those reasons, you can actually substitute it with any of these other types of proof or documentation of why you need to take leave for these reasons. So here's some of the examples. A restraining order. You could have a letter from a county or municipal prosecutor. You could have a documentation of any of the conviction or of the offender. Certification from a DV specialist. So some of the folks that you are working with that are here on the presentation today, you could actually help provide that certification for that individual. Any sort of other documentation that is verifying the services that someone is seeking with a social worker, a clergy member, shelter, or other type of domestic violence professional. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more with Nicole in a bit. You can go to the next slide. So this is just a screenshot of the application. So you can actually print it out and apply through paper, but actually there is an online process as well. And we're gonna give you some of the links and information about where you would go when you are applying. But this is just to give you a sense of what it looks like. Again, the FL1 form that I mentioned before. You can go to the next slide. So the eligibility, and again, I just want to take a step back and make sure everyone understands this is eligibility for the program overall. So that includes for reasons related to domestic violence, but all the other uses that I already described, okay? So family leave insurance is available to actually most employees working in New Jersey. There are some exceptions that you should be aware of. If you're a federal employee, if you aren't actually working in New Jersey, but you're working out of state, or if you're an independent contractor. So technically you're not an employee, although it's important to be aware that misclassification can happen. And that is something that, of course, as you are looking at your eligibility to determine if maybe you're potentially misclassified, something to be aware of. You can go to the next slide. And in terms of eligibility for the program, for the benefit, you do have to meet minimum earnings. So in this year, 2022, you have to work 20 weeks, earning at least $240 or $12,000 for combined total in the base year. And the base year, it gets a little tricky in folks' minds, but it's generally about the year and a half before you take leave. What is happening is the state's going to be looking at the quarters that employers are reporting and seeing if you've met those minimum eligibility earnings. And so that's why it's generally about a year and a half before you take leave. And I just want to mention that these earnings are at any covered employment in New Jersey. So it's not just the employer you're taking leave from, but maybe you've started a new job, and if you had a job previously to help you meet these minimum earnings, you would take all those jobs into account. Go ahead, next slide. So the benefit provides 85% of a worker's average weekly wage, and the cap for 2022, it does adjust annually, is $9.93 a week. And it is available for 12 consecutive weeks, or if you're not going to take it all at once, it's 56 days or 8 weeks. So they call that an intermittent use of FLI. And that's within a 12-month period. Okay, yes, so some of the steps to take, of course, speaking with your employer, letting them know what you're taking leave from. That is something that it depends on your relationship with your employer, and Nicole's going to talk about that a little bit more, and the role that the employer can play in supporting the survivor. But technically, you do have to inform your employer, and so that may be, of course, an issue you need to think about what that risk that might entail and how you can protect the confidentiality of the individual if they're taking it for reasons that are sensitive. So this just describes the timeline that you're supposed to inform your employer, but if it's for an urgent reason, that's considered reasonable notice, as that issue may arise with short notice. But as soon as you become aware that you need to take the leave, then that's considered the reasonable notice, or the 15 days. If you know you have a court date or you have a specific date in mind, 15 days is the ideal timeframe. And so, as I mentioned, you can go online and apply at myleavebenefits.nj.gov. This is part of the Department of Labor's website, and I'm going to share more resources here in a minute. And then for the caregiving, as explained before, if you are going to have a medical care provider certify the reasons that you're taking leave, you have to have them complete a portion of the application. They can either do that with the paper copy, or they can actually complete their portion of the application online as well. Okay, next slide. So this is the landing page for the Department of Labor. The division, the benefits are part of the Division of Temporary Disability and Family Leave Insurance at the Department of Labor. And this is a specific link, and we have even a shortcut link that we'll share with you in the resource page here in a minute, where you can get more details and information about taking it for reasons related to domestic violence. So we're going to talk a little bit more in a second, but before we go into some more detail and take questions and answers, we're going to have Fatmata share with us some other related programs and laws. As Nicole mentioned, some of these laws, like earned sick and safe days, do also include reasons related to domestic violence. But you want to take it away, Fatmata?
Yes, thank you. As Yarrow stated, I'll be talking about other related programs and laws, which will be temporary disability insurance, job and retaliation protection, and earned and sick safe days. So I'm going to talk about temporary disability insurance first, which is also known as CDI or FLI. And for workers who cannot work, this is for workers who cannot work due to physical or mental disability. And it is also available for 26 weeks out of the year. Most employers in New Jersey are required to have TDI for employers, whether it is a private plan or a state plan. Next slide, please. Temporary disabilities, they are available to domestic or sexual violence victim survivors, and your medical care provider actually must certify your claim. Next slide, please. Next, I'll talk about job and retaliation protections. So the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act, also known as FMLA, and the New Jersey Leave Act which is also known as FLA, may protect workers while they are on leave. And it is also illegal for employers to retaliate against an employee for taking or looking into TDI or FLI benefits. And like stated earlier, the SAFE Act also protects workers for reasons related to domestic violence. Next slide. Earned sick days and times can be used for your own health, which can be your own health, caring for a loved one, domestic violence, work or school closure due to public health emergencies, quarantine, and vaccinations and recovery. Next slide, please. And this is a page, this is a screenshot from the Department of Health. It's also a resource that anyone can go to with more detailed information. Sorry, yeah, Department of Labor, sorry. That you can use these resources to get more information, to learn about any of the programs I just named, and also to apply. Next slide. So these are some of the links, and we'll also add the links in the chat. And does anyone, I want to just open up for questions about anything that Yara and I have discussed so far.
So what we can do is have folks, I think I mentioned, if you have any questions, you can put those in the chat. And also we do have the option to raise your hand, and you can just ask your question that way. And I apologize, the resources that I have, oh, sorry, that's the old link. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, Holly, I know you're there, right? They didn't make it in the slide. Unfortunately, it was a little last minute. So we're going to get you some better links for resources on the Department of Labor's website, so you can have those directly. Okay, let's see if we have some questions here. Oh, you already put it in the chat.
Deshonda, sorry. Yeah, Deshonda already she asked the question while you were going through yours, and Holly already answered her.
Okay, do we have any other questions? If folks want to raise their hands, or?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
The form or the application process can be retroactive. And I ask because sometimes survivors may find themselves while seeking for help, they may miss work days, and they may have not time to even contact their employer due to the hectic of the situation that they may experience in the day that they are actually living, which we know is the more serious time. Can the application covers those days and protect them for those days that they miss at work?
Sure. So you do have to apply for benefits within 30 days of when you're taking the leave. So after the fact. So in a way that is retroactive, right? But even if it's beyond that 30 days, you just have to justify the reason of why you're outside of that time frame. It could be as simple as you didn't know that you were able to take leave for that reason related to whatever it was. If it was, like you said, a court date or something, after the fact, you could definitely apply and justify it by just giving an explanation. But just to clarify, it is, in terms of the benefit FLI, there is also TDI, as Fatmata went through the slide, temporary disability insurance, and that's really, you may be able to choose between either of those benefits, but if you have a medical care provider because you're under some sort of physical or mental health reason for taking leave, you may want to consider temporary disability insurance because it is available for up to 26 weeks, while the family leave insurance is only available for the 12 consecutive weeks or the 56 intermittent days. It may depend on how easy it is for the medical care provider to certify your claim as well, because that is the part that they have to do for the disability. And I just wanted to mention that, you know, we are talking about the paid benefit. And when you talk about protecting your job, that is not a process where you typically apply. It's the law, FMLA, as Fatmata mentioned, or the New Jersey Family Leave Act, or the SAFE Act are going to cover you and protect your job. And we didn't get to any of those details, but we will follow up in terms of who is covered and how you can seek protections for your job. And I see someone has their hand up. Jenna, is that how you say your name? Go ahead.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My question is and it's not related to DV, but it's related to the Family Leave Act. If you apply for it and you have those 56 days, right? Intimate days, right? Does that only cover up to 12 weeks, or is this the days itself? Can it go further than the months or the weeks of the 12 weeks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's definitely a little confusing. So for the benefit under FLI or family leave insurance, so that's the benefit where you're taking the time off using the caregiving option for reasons related to domestic violence, but you do not have a medical condition, you do not have a mental or health condition that a medical care provider can certify, then your only option for the paid benefit is family leave insurance. And that's only available for 12 consecutive weeks. You'd have to take it all at once. Or if you're only taking a day here, a day there, then it's only available for 56 individual days, if that makes sense. So there aren't.
Sorry. So the 56 days can be a span of over, say, 4 to 5 months. Say someone has an illness and you just need maybe a day a week. Would that go for the 50? Can that go for the 56 weeks if it's only 1 day a week?
56 days, yes. So you could spread that out over a long period of time for sure. And what happens is it's that you have additional time available to you every 12-month period. So you can exhaust that time in a 12-month period and then have additional time in the new 12-month period.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question.
Yarrow, I actually have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
So how do people who are exempt, so like federal employees, which I'm surprised, and like contractors, so like I know a lot of people might do like Instacart or DoorDash or Uber or something, so like what are their resources?
To see if they maybe are misclassified.
Okay.
I don't know if people saw recently, there was a decision from the Department of Labor, I'm not going to get into, but regarding Lyft, and you know, there may be emerging situations depending on your employment. But if you have multiple jobs, it's possible that one of those jobs you may be considered an employee, while another job you're an independent contractor. So you could collect benefits on the job that you're actually, you know, considered an employee. And not your independent contractor job. That's possible. Federal workers, I actually don't have information about what the rights are for federal employees around taking leave for domestic violence. I believe that it is something that we have to continue to advocate for.
Thank you.
Okay. And I just want to lift up that Rebecca from the Department of Labor put in the chat that if you're helping an individual survivor or victim create a plan to escape abuse, you can start your application online up to 60 days in advance, but then you have to submit it when they go out on that leave. Thank you, Rebecca. And another question is, are you aware of any of another way to speak with someone at the New Jersey Temporary Disability, the Department of Labor, other than the number provided on the website? So the current information is you can use a contact us form that they have, and they also have email. And Holly has provided you from the Department of Labor with her email. that she can try to assist you. And I just wanted to share some other resources here. You can schedule an appointment just to get some advice around questions about paid family leave, not a specific claim. If it's related to a specific claim processing, then you do have to go to the Department of Labor, but you can schedule an appointment to seek just some advice, non-legal advice. And that link is here. And also we have a Facebook group where you can go and kind of source some questions from others who maybe have been through a similar situation and can speak to their experience and give you some advice. Again, always with a grain of salt, that is not legal advice, but it may be a resource that's helpful for you. All right, any other questions before we move on?
Yarrow, if I may, my name is Jen Venziani. I'm the Community Relations Manager for the Division of Temporary Disability and Family Leave Insurance. I did put my information in the chat. Please feel free to reach out. We are currently in the process of getting an outreach team up and running based upon legislation from 2019. So that's going to be something for those of you that work providing these services for survivors of domestic and sexual violence. Please make sure that you keep my information as we get that team up and running. We are looking to be able to go and to have liaisons for your individual programs.
Thank you, Jen.
You're welcome.
All right, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, all right, Nicole. Another question. How that, if you can like walk us, like after the application is submitted, how long it takes for the applicants to know and how that works?
I mean, so it varies. There isn't a clear answer for you. I think that as a general rule of thumb, if you're working with somebody, as best you can prepare them for delays in their claim so that they are not expecting the benefit to be approved and paid quickly. But in the best case scenario, it is approved and paid within 2-3 weeks. I believe the statistic is still that's the majority of claims, especially if you're applying online. They are approved within that sort of 2-3-4 week time frame, but there are situations that they extend beyond that number of weeks. And the best thing you can do is try to prepare your client, the person that you're working with, for that delay, and as much as they can plan for that. I know that's difficult, obviously, when someone is relying on that income to help them out. But that generally there is no, if they meet those eligibility that I described before, there is no reason why they will not receive their money. As unsettling as it can sometimes be to not have that money approved right away. Yeah. Okay.
So just to clarify, that person is out of their job because they need to be out to deal with the issues of the family issue. And eventually in 3 weeks or so, they will start getting paid.
I mean, generally, right? That's why it's a hard thing to promise somebody a clear timeline. Yeah, and the best thing you can do is just help them prepare for, that uncertainty and try to reassure them. And I think the role that we have as, support for them is, if there is the need to troubleshoot, figuring out how to get information. I thank the Department of Labor for being here and sharing contact information. If something is being held up, they can reach out. You can help them reach out, right? So they aren't alone in doing that. And that's really meaningful. Okay, so I want to go ahead and turn it back to Nicole for just a little bit of wrap up on the different perspectives that you might bring today and how you can some of these questions and how you can support, not just in terms of accessing paid leave benefit, but just other ways that you may be able to support the individuals that are facing, escaping violence and coping with their economic security. There you go. Take it away, Nicole.
Thank you so much. And I just want to mention a couple of things. So one, my PowerPoint's being a little wonky right now, which is why you're seeing it with the outline version. But also I saw the comment or the question in the chat about sharing slides. So yes, so actually a little call to my team members that are on this with me, that if maybe you could pull the link and put it in the chat to these slides and share it. But we'll also make sure we share it with Yarrow and her team so that they can get this information out to you so you can share it. And just wanted to lift up a couple of things that were just shared. So one, Jana, I love the question you asked about how the FLI time can be spent, right? So if it's that consecutive time of taking the full 12 weeks versus, maybe needing to take a day a week, right? We know that perhaps as survivors start to access services, they may have a weekly counseling approachment, or there may be those appointments that come up throughout the following months, right? So they can carve out that time each week where they can attend to those needs. So I think that's a great option to put out there. And also with that waiting period that Calandria highlighted, right? That may be another opportunity if the survivor is potentially eligible for some other benefits and resources, to really pull out that toolbox that Beatrice shared in terms of some of the other financial resources and support. There's a lot of funding out there for homelessness prevention and eviction prevention, and supporting individuals with rental payments and mortgage payments. So there may potentially be other resources that could help supplement, or within that period of time when they're waiting, where they may be able to acquire other benefits more immediately. But every case is different. And so definitely working with working collaboratively with, if you're on the employment side, with your domestic violence programs, vice versa. And again, grateful to Department of Labor for being on here and helping to answer some of those questions and provide contact information. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how the workplace can really set itself up to be a safe workplace, but a place where employees feel safe coming forward and sharing their experiences, a safe place where they feel that they can get information about what resources are available, being able to navigate the benefits that we're talking about so that it's easily accessible, everyone's informed about it, and that the workplace is prepared and the employer and their team is prepared to address needs related to their employees who may be experiencing domestic violence. One thing that I do want to mention is, we tend to talk about this, and I tend to talk about this as thinking about the employee who may be the victim survivor. But I think it's really important that we also start to recognize and think about, what role do we play if we have an employee who actually may be the person who's causing harm in their relationship, and where there's opportunities for us to connect them to resources and services in their community, where there may be opportunities for us to help provide some level of accountability and working with them so we can help participate in that change process with them. So I just wanted to mention that. And also because I tend to talk about domestic violence in the workplace, thinking about workplaces outside the domestic violence community, but we have to recognize the domestic violence community itself, right? All of our workplaces need to make sure that we are a safe place for our advocates to come forward if they are experiencing harm, or if they need to navigate the resources that we're talking about today. Because sometimes there is this fear or this feeling that I can't come forward because I'm an advocate, or because these are the services that I should be sharing and providing with my clients. But these are for all employees, right? And so we want to make sure our workplaces are also trauma informed and able to share this information with the advocates that we're working with. So first and foremost is just thinking about your workplace and knowing that every workplace is different, and workplaces probably look a lot different now than they did 2 years ago. How can I make sure that I'm providing every single employee that I hire, that I retain, that I continue to educate and train with information about the benefits that are available to them, with information about domestic violence and how I can be a safe place, or this place of employment can be a safe place for them to access resources. So thinking about your hiring package, thinking about the emails that you send out, your newsletters, your annual benefit information, right? Ways that you can continuously provide that information so that it's not just that one time that they're seeing that poster in the break room, but it's information that we're consistently sharing so that individuals are aware of it, but they also start to get a sense that this is a culture that takes this seriously, that is concerned about my safety and my coworker safety, and has information available. post-training programs and lunch and learns. So if you go to our list of domestic violence programs, I encourage you to get to know your local program if you're not already familiar with them. Most, if not all of our programs have trainers and educators on their staff who can come out and provide training and education, who can coordinate lunch and learns with you. We've really just scratched the surface a tiny, tiny bit. I think it's important to recognize, as we talked about, most survivors experience economic control. Similarly, most survivors experience isolation. And so the workplace might be one of few, if not the only place where a survivor may actually have access to information outside of that relationship. So the workplace could be a really, really great place to provide that education, connection to resources, help talk about how to access resources. So that's something that's available to them, especially when it may not be safe for them to look for those resources outside or in their personal life. And also think of ways where you could participate with your community programs and other community through community events, partnering with local programs around specific events, maybe having a drive or around the awareness months. For instance, October is Domestic Violence Awareness and Prevention Month. That might be a great point in time to do some work together to really bring awareness. The next step beyond that universal education is really thinking about how do we ensure that when employees are experiencing domestic violence, that this is a safe place for them to get information and to be connected to resources. So in addition to those lunch and learns and maybe that basic training and education, I would encourage maybe more specific training for supervisors, managers, HR staff, and anybody that might be in a position where they'll be directly responding to team members who may be experiencing domestic violence or need support and resources. Think about the policies in your workplace and how you might be able to better support individuals experiencing domestic violence. Identifying staff or a team, and I certainly recommend a team because it's always, I think it helps people feel more empowered and confident to do this work when they're not doing it alone. And I could tell you, I rely on a team to do this work. So if you don't have staff large enough to have a team, this is another great opportunity to reach out to your domestic violence program and say, I'd like to do more in my workplace. I don't know how to get started. Or can I work with somebody to help me look at our policies, to look at our practices in our office, to look at ways that we could provide more training to our supervisors. Also collaborating with your employees. So when you do have an employee coming forward who has experienced domestic violence and is sharing concerns, either about their safety or even just the need to investigate what benefits they have and maybe to take time off, is to really work with the individual employee. The Workplaces Respond website on the bottom of this slide is a great resource. This is a national resource center through the Futures Without Violence. And you'll find they have great tools for advocates as well as for the employee and the employer, and can really give you some good hands-on tools in terms of preparing your workplace to address domestic violence. And within there, you'll see some sample safety plans, things to take into account when addressing domestic violence and helping an employee address domestic violence in the workplace. But there's no cookie cutter solution. And so you really do need to collaborate with that specific employee to understand what their safety needs are, what risks they may be experiencing, and what benefits, or I should say, what opportunities you might have to help them safety plan. And again, that's going to look different depending on what your employment looks like. If it's an office versus remote work, maybe it's domestic work, right? So there's a lot of different dynamics and environments in which people may be employed. And so really having to think that through with the employee can be helpful in making them feel safer. For my fellow advocates on the call, I also encourage you to think about how are we integrating information about economic abuse and control, and particularly workplace issues, as part of our ongoing work. So in terms of our education, right? So when we think about outreach and education with different systems, are we thinking about employers and workplaces? Are we thinking about how we can create that information and provide that collaboration so that workplaces and employers and HR officers are informed on domestic violence and how to respond to it? Are you collaborating with them and able to provide technical assistance on development of policies that they may be creating for their workplace, perhaps offering training for their employers or their HR officers and supervisors? Maybe providing technical assistance or direct service assistance when they do have that employee who comes forward and needs support, especially for smaller workplaces and smaller businesses. Again, they may not have the staff capacity to have a team. And so maybe it's a partnership you can develop so that when they do have individuals who need support, you could provide that. And also thinking about the training that we provide to advocates. So I'm thinking about, and I know there's a couple of DVRT coordinators on the phone. So all of those volunteers that are meeting with survivors at police departments after an incident, or domestic violence liaisons working with DCP&P workers, right? Equipping them with this information as well, because those could be great access points as survivors are starting to learn about what resources are available to them, letting them know if you're employed, you have a right to take time off, and helping them navigate that process so that they have those resources. And that could be part of their safety plan as they're navigating other resources. And as always, and as I mentioned in the previous slide, collaborating with those survivors to really understand, what the impact has been on them. One of the resources that you'll find in the workplacerespond.org website is some really great safety planning questions to really inquire about how domestic violence may be impacting the survivor's work, to really think about how can we incorporate safety planning. So not only are they safe at work and feel physically safe at work, but they also have the opportunity to navigate the resources and the benefits that we've talked about. And we know for some survivors, they may not have a safe place outside of work to navigate those resources and those benefits. And so thinking about how can we be a safe place, right, to help them file those applications, to help them make those phone calls, and to make sure that that's part of their plan. And you'll also find in the PowerPoint, when you receive it, some additional resource information. Again, Beatrice shared some specific direct service and financial support that you can share with survivors. These websites can offer more information, especially to all of you kind of on that policy side, on that planning side, that development side, to really make sure that we're prepared to be able to respond to these cases and these situations before they come to us. And then also just to point to the fact that you'll have our contact information. So if you don't already have that, here's information for a couple of members on our Housing and Economic Justice team, C.R. Hart and Beatrice Patino-Sherrard, and on our Policy and Education team, Calandria Ortiz-Resende, along with myself. So if you have any questions about the information that we shared today, or if we can help connect you to your local programs and provide those collaborations, or if you would like additional education, please don't hesitate to reach out to ask us for any support.
Thank you, Nicole. Such a wealth of information and resources. So we will definitely be sure to send all those slides and links to you in follow-up. But they're also in the chat if you're interested in opening them up now and keeping them on your browser. So we're going to go ahead and actually launch our breakout groups. Mom Tina, if you could share the slide for the breakout groups so folks can see these questions. We're going to have Beatrice, Nicole, Fatmata, and Calandria and myself do the breakout groups. We're going to just spend about 9 minutes discussing challenges or barriers survivors experience in trying to access information, resources, benefits related to domestic violence, including access to paid leave, and also challenges or barriers that you experience in your workplace that impact your ability to respond to domestic violence and support employees experiencing domestic violence. So something can consider. It was the slide before, unless it's not available, Mom Tina, I'm not sure. Nope, I guess it's not available. So I'm going to go ahead. You all should have these questions when you get into your breakout groups, but if for whatever reason you need something, just hit the button to ask for some assistance. All right, we're going to spend about 9 minutes and I'll see you all soon.
Yara, you are muted.
Oh, I'm just blabbering away. As everyone's joining, we don't have a lot of time, but I do want to take about a minute and let everyone debrief the experience in their groups. And I'm going to go ahead and do it really quickly first for my group. Thank you for sharing, everyone in my group. folks shared that the issue, of course, facing some survivors is they don't work outside of the home, and that some of them are undocumented workers. And in fact, what that means is there's a lot of fear, and the fear of retaliation is extremely strong for undocumented workers, and that they also face a double standard where they do often report taxes through an ITIN, but often collecting a benefit can be difficult. And I just mentioned in my group, and I mentioned very briefly here, the earned sick leave law that Famata mentioned, as well as Nicole, it does require the employer to pay the employee directly for at least 5 days a year for all the reasons we described, including domestic violence. And that can be a direct way to try to seek benefits, although of course there still may be that issue of fear. And some others shared that their organization working in Black churches as a potential resource to get information out to the community. Thank you so much, Selena, for that. And Krista also just how she could support a coworker who may be struggling with this. And I shared the follow-up that we'll provide with some of those links and resources that Nicole had. So I want to see if Nicole, you can try to do that in about as short as I just did and what your group talked about.
Yeah, I think there was some overlap. I think the thing we talked a bit about was fear, like you said, right? Just not feeling safe, the shame, the embarrassment of coming forward. And, I said, when we think about just needing to take time off regardless, without domestic violence, sometimes it can feel, difficult to share what we need from our employer. So put on top of that, right, something that may be very personal and also very difficult to share. And also that sometimes employers just don't know about these resources either. So I think, one of the things we really tried to highlight here, the need for employers to be educated so that they can provide the education to their employees. So that, again, it's, very clear from the very beginning when they walk in the doors of that new job that those benefits are available and that they're available for anybody for the number of reasons that they're eligible for, including domestic and sexual violence. And that this information, you mentioned this, the churches, schools and other areas of our community that, we may not think about to talk about employment rights and employee rights and domestic violence, but those could be really great access points to help educate the community so that everybody's aware and familiar with the resources.
Thanks, Nicole. Amanda, do you have about 30 seconds? Maybe anything to add differently that your group discussed?
Yeah, it wasn't much different. It's just about same thing, not knowing the information. One thing I think might be, I guess, not having the technology to actually apply could be a challenge, because maybe the person that is being abused, maybe the abuser is actually withholding, like, a phone or computer from that person, so they don't have the resources to apply. And then for the second question, just lack of information in the workplace. If HR doesn't know, then the employees won't know, or supervisors can probably give employees a hard time trying to take off of work.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you. Calandria.
And yes, in our group, we overlap everything that the other groups share. One thing that we discuss is the language barrier when it comes to forms, when it comes to following processes in the government applications, and also the cultural nuances that the domestic violence in itself have, and how victims perceive themselves and how they feel that they are being perceived.
Terrific. That was so quick. And I think, Beatrice, in your group, did you have something that you thought would be nice to share?
Yeah, much of what we already said. One thing that hasn't been mentioned is that work history could be a barrier. Survivors might not have enough time working at one place because they work at different places, and having to leave those employments. It's something that we see. So I think that was different, and thank you, Denise, for that. And we spoke about immigration and the fear about speaking, especially for immigrant communities and undocumented, and not feeling safe in the workplace to speak about it and speak about dealing with domestic violence. So pretty much almost everything else was the same. Thank you.
I think that was all of our groups, right? Great. Thanks so much for everyone participating. We're going to wrap it up with a few other things. If you can go to the next slide, Mamsihina. So as you just mentioned, Beatrice, there may be some barriers in terms of the eligibility for family leave. That is something that we're looking at in our increasing access to family leave for all. And we would love to take anyone who's actually experienced that and is willing to share their story. I'll have a form that I can share with you so that we can actually explain to policymakers why we need to open up eligibility, strengthen job protections, as the qualifications and eligibility for job protection can also limit people, as well as just coping with the duration of the time that it takes to process claims and the required documentation that may be difficult to find. If you want to say something, Nicole, as well about that.
Yeah, so one of the things that we know can be a challenge for survivors, for some survivors, particularly undocumented survivors, may be being able to have documentation, right? So one might be the fear of, utilizing some of the systems that we ordinarily think survivors will have documentation from, like police or the hospital or a counselor. And so, as we're talking about this, we're talking about today about survivors needing time to access those resources. So it's a little bit of the cart before the horse, right? Of expecting them to go out to get these resources without actually having that time off. And also recognizing, and for those of us that do outreach and education, how important making sure all of those systems are safe places for individuals to get that information. So, thinking about the training we do with law enforcement and the hospitals and all of those other systems, and how this might be an important piece for us to start to include so that it does become a little bit of a safer place. But we are hoping, and while we don't know what the end game will look like, we do hope that maybe we can relieve some of the documentation requirements for some survivors so that it is easier for them to acquire these benefits without having, without being fearful of not having that documentation to support that.
Thank you. Mamsihina, could you share the next slide? So this is a link where you can, if there are experiences that you think would help us to make the case of how we can ease and make access to paid leave and other barriers facing survivors around being able to afford to take time off, please share your story. We will be in touch with you as you provide us with the information. And the next slide. It's really the most valuable tool in terms of continuing to increase access is sharing your story. And of course, we recognize that that can be very difficult for survivors, and a vulnerable time may not be the right time, but maybe when they're on more stable ground, that is a time when they could share their story. And then just finally, as we close out, I'm sorry, we're just slightly over the bottom of the hour. We would love for you to join us in our effort to increase awareness, increase access, and be part of the New Jersey Paid Leave Outreach Collaborative. We are forming work groups or subcommittees from the different perspectives, HR, advocates, as well as social workers. We would love for you to be a part of it so that we can really tackle this question of how we can have more people access it and be aware of it. So please join the Paid Leave Outreach Collaborative. If you could put that in the chat, and we'll follow up, of course. People are welcome to stay on if you have a few more questions or thoughts, but the rest of you, if you need to go, we don't want to take up any more of your time, and we appreciate you being here with us today, and we'll follow up with you again with the slides and the resources. So thank you, but I'm going to hang on just in case anybody wants to chat. Thank you.
Yarrow, I don't think that link is working. I just clicked it and it's saying something's wrong. Is everybody else getting that? Just so you know.
I'll get it for everyone in the follow-up.
Thanks, bye Yarrow.
Put it here. There you go.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye, Holly.
Bye.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Nicole, Mamsihina, Famana, Beatrice. It was so nice to meet you. And thanks, everyone, for being a part of this. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.
Thanks for all your